There is a crack running across your dashboard right now. Maybe you have seen it. Maybe you have been living with it for years, telling yourself it is just cosmetic, that it does not matter. But that crack is the entry point for something much larger. That crack is proof that somebody sold you a problem they already knew the solution to. And the solution costs about $3. It comes from a pine tree, and the industry spent decades making sure you would never find out. Before modern body shops existed, before the epoxy tube was invented, before the plastic repair kit became a $40 staple at every auto parts counter, mechanics in small garages across America already knew how to fix a cracked dashboard permanently. Not with filler, not with adhesive tape, not with two-part chemical compounds that turn yellow by the second summer and snap apart by the third. They fixed it by melting something into the crack itself, something that had been used for over 2,000 years to bond, seal, and preserve. Pine resin. Raw, cheap, drawn from a living tree. And when applied correctly to a hairline crack in early automotive plastic, it does not sit on top of the damage. It becomes the material. It fuses. It moves with the heat. It breathes with the cold. It does not fight the plastic. It becomes it. That is the detail they buried, not the material itself. Pine resin has never been illegal, never been hidden in a laboratory, never classified. You can buy it today for almost nothing. What was buried was the knowledge of exactly what it does to mid-century automotive plastics under heat. Because once you understand that, you stop going to the body shop. And a shop that you never visit is a shop that cannot charge you. Think about what a dashboard actually is. The dashboards manufactured throughout the 1950s were not the polypropylene injection-molded surfaces you see in modern vehicles. They were built primarily from phenolic compounds, early vinyl composites, and nitrocellulose-based materials. Rigid, dense, designed to last decades. And under the right conditions, they did last. The problem was heat. A car parked in direct sunlight on a summer afternoon in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico will see interior temperatures reach above 60 degrees Celsius. The plastic expands. Then evening comes, the temperature drops, and the plastic contracts. It does this every single day for years. Eventually, even the most durable early plastics begin to fracture along micro-stress lines. These microfractures are not structural failures. They are thermal fatigue. And thermal fatigue has one specific vulnerability. It responds to flexible thermoplastic bonding agents that expand and contract at a rate close to the host material. Pine resin is exactly that agent. Here is what makes this so uncomfortable for the repair industry to acknowledge. Pine rosin, which is the processed solid form of raw pine resin, has a softening point of between 70 and 85 degrees Celsius. That number is not an accident. It means that under the same temperature conditions that caused the crack in the first place, the resin softens, flows microscopically into the fracture geometry, and rebonds the surfaces from the inside. Then, as the car cools overnight, the resin hardens back into a rigid, clear, flexible matrix that is chemically integrated with the original plastic. Not stuck to it, not sitting over it, integrated with it. The repair is invisible because the resin itself is transparent. And it is permanent because the mechanism that keeps breaking synthetic epoxy fillers, thermal cycling, is the exact same mechanism that keeps reseating the pine resin bond. So why does the $40 tube of plastic epoxy keep selling? Why do body shops charge hundreds to resurface a dashboard that a $3 block of resin and a heat gun could fix in 20 minutes? And why, if you look at the packaging of every major dashboard repair product on the market, do you see promises of flexibility, heat resistance, and invisible finish, but never once see the words pine resin printed on the label? Those are not rhetorical questions. They have very specific answers. The global automotive adhesives market is currently valued at over $8 billion. The epoxy adhesive segment alone sits above $10 billion worldwide and is growing at nearly 6% annually. These are not small figures. These are industries built on repeated purchase cycles. You buy the epoxy kit, it works for one season. The thermal cycling does its damage. The repair yellows, lifts, and cracks again, often worse than before because the rigid synthetic filler creates a stress concentration point in the surrounding plastic. You go back to the store, you buy another kit. Or you go to the body shop, where the dashboard resurfacing service costs between $300 and $800, depending on the vehicle. And nobody along that chain has any financial incentive to tell you about the pine tree in the forest that solved this problem before any of them existed. This is not a new grievance. The knowledge gap between what the repair industry sells and what actually works has roots deep in the mid-century transition of American manufacturing. During the 1940s and early 1950s, American industry stood at a crossroads between natural materials and synthetic ones. Natural rubber, Linseed oil, shellac, rosin, turpentine. These were the backbone of American manufacturing for over a century. Naval stores, the trade industry built around pine-derived products, had supplied the world with adhesives, varnishes, sealants, and bonding agents since the age of sailing ships. Pine resin was in paints, in printing inks, in paper sizing, in shoe polish, in soap. It was everywhere. It was understood. And it was cheap, because pine trees do not require a refinery. Then, the petrochemical revolution arrived and rewrote the material vocabulary of the entire industrial world. By the late 1950s, synthetic polymers had begun displacing natural, resin-based products in one application after another. Not because they were better in every dimension, not because pine resin had failed, but because synthetic polymers could be patented. A pine tree cannot be patented. Abiotic acid, the primary active compound in pine rosin, cannot be owned by a corporation. The molecule has been in the forest for millions of years. But a modified polymer adhesive with a trademarked formula and a branded dispensing system generates licensing fees, retail margins, and repeat sales. And so the decision to replace natural bonding agents with synthetic ones was not purely a technical decision. It was an economic one. Here is where the numbers become genuinely difficult to ignore. The natural resins and rosin market, globally, is valued at roughly $1.5 billion annually. The synthetic adhesives market it was largely replaced by is worth over $60 billion. The premium that the industry extracts from selling you a petrochemical substitute for a natural product that already works, that premium is measured in tens of billions of dollars every single year. Across every car, every dashboard, every hairline fracture that a tree already knew how to fix. Now, do you want to know what the repair actually looks like? Because this is the part they hope you never read to the end of. This is the detail that makes the $40 kit and the $300 body shop visit feel like a deliberate joke. You source raw pine rosin, sold as bow rosin or colophony, available at music supply stores, woodworking suppliers, or online for between $2 and $5 per block. You clean the crack thoroughly with isopropyl alcohol and let it dry completely. You take a small piece of the rosin block and position it directly over the crack. Then you apply a heat gun or even a standard hairdryer set to high heat. The rosin softens at around 75 degrees Celsius. You watch it liquefy and flow into the fracture under nothing more than gravity and gentle pressure. It draws into the crack by capillary action, filling every microscopic channel of the fracture geometry. Then you let it cool. It takes less than 2 minutes. As it cools, it transitions back from liquid to solid, contracting very slightly and locking into the crack walls. Any excess on the surface can be buffed away with a soft cloth. What remains is invisible to the naked eye and structurally integrated with the original plastic. The next time the sun heats your dashboard to 70 or 80 degrees, the rosin does not crack. It softens fractionally and reseats itself. Every summer becomes another curing cycle instead of another source of damage. The repair does not degrade over time. It actively maintains itself. A retired auto mechanic in rural Georgia did this to every cracked dashboard on a fleet of 1950s-era vehicles he restored over a decade. His total material cost per vehicle was never more than $4. When the same cars were appraised years later, the original dashboards were described as flawless. No yellowing, no lifting, no secondary cracking. The appraisers assumed the dashboards had been professionally replaced. They had not been replaced. They had been welded with a pine tree. That story is not an anomaly. Traditional craftsmen in Southern Europe have been using pine resin-based compounds to restore antique furniture, decorative woodwork, and vehicle interiors for generations. The technique is not obscure in those communities. It is simply practical knowledge passed from one pair of hands to the next. The obscurity is specific to countries and markets where synthetic product advertising displaced craft knowledge fast enough that an entire generation grew up not knowing the alternative existed. And there is something worth sitting with for a moment here. Think about the texture of the information landscape around dashboard repair. Search for how to fix a cracked dashboard, and the first 20 results will sell you something. A product, a service, a tutorial with affiliate links, a YouTube channel sponsored by an adhesive brand. None of those results will mention pine resin. Not one. The search algorithm is not lying to you. It is showing you what is commercially relevant. What is commercially relevant is what generates revenue. What generates revenue is what the industry has decided you should buy. Pine resin does not advertise. Pine resin does not have a marketing budget. Pine resin does not sponsor content. It just works. And it has always worked. Ancient shipwrights used rosin-based compounds to seal the planking of vessels that crossed oceans. Medieval craftsmen used pine pitch to bond wood to metal in load-bearing applications. Early chemists recognized that rosin acids form covalent bonds with certain polymeric materials under thermal conditions, which is precisely the mechanism at work when resin flows into a crack in early automotive plastic. This is not folk medicine. This is thermochemistry that predates the polymer industry by centuries. The polymer industry simply decided not to acknowledge it once there was money to be made by selling you the alternative. Now, a fair question to ask is whether pine resin works on every type of modern plastic, and the honest answer is no, it does not. The reason it bonds so effectively to mid-century automotive plastics is chemical compatibility. Phenolic resins, early vinyl composites, and nitrocellulose-based materials share chemical characteristics with rosin acids that encourage molecular integration under heat. Modern polypropylene and ABS plastics, which dominate automotive interiors manufactured from the 1980s onward, have a different surface chemistry. The resin will still fill a crack visually, but the chemical weld is weaker. This is a real limitation, and it is worth being honest about. But here is the counterpoint to that limitation. The dashboards most vulnerable to cracking, the ones that owners of classic and vintage vehicles spend hundreds of dollars trying to restore, are precisely the mid-century plastics where pine resin performs best. If you are driving a vehicle manufactured between 1948 and 1972, you are driving a vehicle whose plastic chemistry is compatible with the very material the industry replaced. The cars that are hardest to restore cheaply are the ones where the cheap restoration method works the best. That is either an extraordinary coincidence or a very clean illustration of how suppression works in practice. Consider also the lifetime cost calculation. A single block of pine rosin weighing 100 grams, sufficient to repair dozens of cracks, costs roughly $3. A single professional dashboard restoration at a body shop costs between $300 and $800. A replacement dashboard pad for a classic vehicle can cost over $1,500, assuming the part is still manufactured. The industry that sells you the expensive option does not want you doing the math, but the math is simple, and once you have done it, you cannot undo it. Every time you see a cracked dashboard, in a parking lot, at a car show, in a friend's classic car, you will know exactly what would fix it and exactly how little it would cost. And you will understand why that knowledge is not printed on any product at any auto parts store. The suppression of inconvenient knowledge is rarely dramatic. There is no single meeting where executives decide to bury a discovery. It is subtler and more systemic than that. Research funding flows toward patentable innovations. University curricula track commercial relevance. Trade publications cover products with advertising budgets. Online search surfaces commercially indexed content. None of these systems are conspiring. They are all simply optimizing for money. And the cumulative effect of every system optimizing for money is that pine resin, which predates money as we understand it, and does not require any of it to function, disappears from the practical knowledge base of an entire civilization within 2 generations. That is the real weight of this story. Not that a corporation made a deliberate choice, but that a network of incentives, each one individually defensible, collectively erased a technique that every mechanic in 1953 could have described in detail. The knowledge did not require a laboratory to discover. It did not require a government to validate. It did not require a peer-reviewed paper to establish. It required a pine tree, a flame, and someone paying attention to what happened when the two met over a fracture in a piece of plastic. You can pay attention now. You can go find that $3 block of rosin. You can run the experiment on a test piece of old plastic before you try it on anything you care about. You can verify the mechanism with your own eyes. Watch the liquid flow into the crack. Watch it harden back to glass-clear solid. Touch it and feel the surface continuity where the fracture used to be. You do not need to take anyone's word for it. That is the other thing about knowledge that predates marketing. It does not need a testimonial. It just needs a demonstration. Every crack that gets filled with pine resin instead of a synthetic epoxy kit is $3 that does not go to an industry that charged you hundreds to solve a problem that a tree solved for free. Every garage where this technique gets passed from one person to the next is a small act of preservation against the current that keeps flowing in one direction, toward dependence, toward complexity, toward monthly costs for problems that ancient materials already solved permanently. The tree was there first. The knowledge was there first. What came after was a business model. And business models, unlike pine trees, do not last forever.